Everyone feared Marco Moretti. His enemies called him a monster. His allies called him a king. But no one knew that one rainy night, one desperate cry for help would destroy the life he had built, and give him a reason to live. The sound of thunder shook the streets of Chicago. Black SUVs moved slowly through the empty road while rain poured down like waterfalls. Inside the lead vehicle sat Marco Moretti. At 42 years old, he ruled one of the most powerful criminal empires in the city. His name alone made grown men tremble. He was dressed in a black suit, his expression cold and unreadable. Beside him sat his right-hand man, Vincent Romano. Vincent checked his phone and smiled. The meeting went perfectly. The Russians agreed. Marco nodded. Good. But his voice held no excitement. Money, power, respect. He had everything. Yet every day felt empty. His wife Isabella had died 5 years earlier from cancer. They had tried for years to have children. They never got the chance. Since losing her, Marco had become colder, harder, more dangerous. Nothing mattered anymore. Or so he thought. Suddenly headlights flashed ahead. Vincent frowned. What the hell? On the side of the road, a woman stumbled through the rain. She looked terrified. And she was very pregnant. She waved her arms desperately. Help. Please. Vincent cursed. Keep driving. Marco stared at the woman. She looked exhausted, scared, broken. The car moved past her. Then Marco spoke. Stop. Vincent blinked. What? Stop the car. The convoy came to a halt. Rain hammered the windows. Marco stepped outside. The woman nearly collapsed. Please, she cried. They're trying to kill me. Marco caught her before she hit the ground. Her body shook violently. Who's trying to kill you? He asked. Before she could answer, 2 black sedans appeared behind her. Vincent immediately drew his weapon. Boss. 4 armed men jumped out. Marco's eyes turned ice cold. One of the men shouted, Hand her over. The pregnant woman buried herself against Marco. No. Marco looked at the strangers. Then he calmly adjusted his tie. You interrupted my evening. One of the men laughed. This doesn't concern you. Marco smiled slightly. Unfortunately for you, she asked me for help. The gunfire started seconds later. Rain mixed with blood. Vincent and Marco's men moved with deadly precision. Within 30 seconds, the attackers lay motionless. The surviving man dropped his weapon. His face pale. He suddenly recognized Marco. Oh God. Fear flooded his eyes. You're Moretti. Marco crouched beside him. Now we're getting somewhere. The man trembled. We were paid. By who? The man hesitated. Marco sighed. Wrong answer. A second later, Vincent finished the interrogation permanently. The woman stared in horror. Marco looked at her. What is your name? Through tears, she whispered. Emily. And then she collapsed. Neither of them knew it. But this moment would change both of their lives forever. Emily woke up surrounded by luxury. Soft blankets. Warm lights. A massive bedroom. Confusion filled her eyes. Then she saw him. Marco sat quietly in a chair, reading a newspaper. He looked up. Good. You're awake. Emily panicked. Where am I? My home. Her eyes widened. She had heard stories about Marco Moretti. Everyone had. Some called him a devil. Others called him a legend. She immediately tried to sit up. I need to leave. Marco shook his head. No. She stared. No. You fainted. The doctor says you're dehydrated and stressed. Emily's voice trembled. You don't understand. They're coming. Marco calmly folded the newspaper. They already came. Her face went white. What? They failed. Emily looked terrified. Tears filled her eyes. Oh God. Marco frowned. Why are they after you? For a long moment she remained silent. Then she whispered. My husband. Marco's eyes narrowed. Your husband hired them? She nodded. He wants me dead. Marco sat upright. What kind of husband kills the mother of his child? Emily began crying. Because the baby isn't his. Silence. Marco stared. What? It was before I met him. I didn't know I was pregnant. When he found out, he became violent. Her voice broke. He said I ruined his life. Marco said nothing. But something about her pain felt familiar. Too familiar. Memories of Isabella flashed inside his mind. Her tears. Her fear. Her final days. Marco stood. You're safe here. Emily looked up. Why are you helping me? He paused. He honestly didn't know. Finally he answered softly. Because someone should. For the first time in years, Marco Moretti felt something other than anger. And that frightened him. Because men like Marco were not meant to have soft hearts. And soft hearts often became targets. He had no idea that the greatest betrayal of his life was already waiting inside his own family. And when it came, everything would burn. Days turned into weeks. Emily stayed in the mansion. At first she feared Marco. But slowly she saw another side of him. The side nobody else knew. He made sure she ate. He called doctors personally. He even argued with chefs over nutrition. Vincent nearly fainted one afternoon. Marco stood in the kitchen, holding a cookbook. Vincent rubbed his eyes. Boss. Marco looked annoyed. What? You once tortured a man for disrespecting pasta. Marco glared. And? Now you're baking blueberry muffins. Marco pointed a spoon at him. Get out. Vincent burst out laughing. Emily heard everything. And for the first time in months, she smiled. Marco noticed. And somehow, that smile mattered more than million-dollar deals. One evening they sat together near the fireplace. Emily looked at an old photograph. A beautiful woman stood beside Marco. Your wife. He nodded. Isabella. You loved her very much. His eyes softened. More than anything. Emily smiled sadly. She was lucky. Marco looked away. No. His voice became quiet. I was the lucky one. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Emily asked softly. Do you ever stop missing someone? Marco smiled sadly. No. He looked at the fire. You just learn how to carry the pain. Emily wiped tears from her eyes. And for the first time since losing her own dreams, she felt understood. But upstairs, someone watched them. Marco's younger brother, Luca Moretti. And hatred burned inside his eyes. Because Luca wanted Marco's empire. And Emily was becoming the perfect weapon. What nobody knew was that Luca had already made a deal with Marco's enemies. So, blood would once again cover the streets of Chicago. Days turned into weeks. Emily stayed in the mansion. At first she feared Marco. But slowly she saw another side of him. The side nobody else knew. He made sure she ate. He called doctors personally. He even argued with chefs over nutrition. Vincent nearly fainted one afternoon. Marco stood in the kitchen, holding a cookbook. Vincent rubbed his eyes. Boss. Marco looked annoyed. What? You once tortured a man for disrespecting pasta. Marco glared. And? Now you're baking blueberry muffins. Marco pointed a spoon at him. Get out. Vincent burst out laughing. Emily heard everything. And for the first time in months, she smiled. Marco noticed. And somehow, that smile mattered more than million-dollar deals. One evening they sat together near the fireplace. Emily looked at an old photograph. A beautiful woman stood beside Marco. Your wife. He nodded. Isabella. You loved her very much. His eyes softened. More than anything. Emily smiled sadly. She was lucky. Marco looked away. No. His voice became quiet. I was the lucky one. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Emily asked softly. Do you ever stop missing someone? Marco smiled sadly. No. He looked at the fire. You just learn how to carry the pain. Emily wiped tears from her eyes. And for the first time since losing her own dreams, she felt understood. But upstairs, someone watched them. Marco's younger brother, Luca Moretti. And hatred burned inside his eyes. Because Luca wanted Marco's empire. And Emily was becoming the perfect weapon. What nobody knew was that Luca had already made a deal with Marco's enemies. So, blood would once again cover the streets of Chicago. Days turned into weeks. Emily stayed in the mansion. At first she feared Marco. But slowly she saw another side of him. The side nobody else knew. He made sure she ate. He called doctors personally. He even argued with chefs over nutrition. Vincent nearly fainted one afternoon. Marco stood in the kitchen, holding a cookbook. Vincent rubbed his eyes. "Boss." Marco looked annoyed. "What?" "You once tortured a man for disrespecting pasta." Marco glared. "And? Now you're baking blueberry muffins." Marco pointed a spoon at him. "Get out." Vincent burst out laughing. Emily heard everything. And for the first time in months, she smiled. Marco noticed. And somehow, that smile mattered more than million-dollar deals. One evening they sat together near the fireplace. Emily looked at an old photograph. A beautiful woman stood beside Marco. "Your wife." He nodded. "Isabella. You loved her very much." His eyes softened. "More than anything." Emily smiled sadly. "She was lucky." Marco looked away. "No." His voice became quiet. "I was the lucky one." For several seconds neither spoke. Then Emily asked softly, "Do you ever stop missing someone?" Marco smiled sadly. "No." He looked at the fire. "You just learn how to carry the pain." Emily wiped tears from her eyes. And for the first time since losing her own dreams, she felt understood. But upstairs, someone watched them. Marco's younger brother, Luca Moretti. And hatred burned inside his eyes. Because Luca wanted Marco's empire. And Emily was becoming the perfect weapon. What nobody knew was that Luca had already made a deal with Marco's enemies. So, blood would once again cover the streets of Chicago. Marco found Emily crying. Her hands trembled violently. He rushed toward her. "Emily." She looked up. Fear filled her eyes. "Someone betrayed us." Marco froze. "What happened?" She explained the phone call. As she spoke, Marco's face became colder, deadlier. By the time she finished, the room itself felt colder. Vincent entered and immediately sensed danger. "Boss?" Marco looked at him. "Lock the house down." Vincent nodded. "No one leaves." Within minutes, armed guards surrounded the mansion. Phones were confiscated. Employees questioned. Nobody understood why. But Marco knew one thing. Someone close to him had crossed a line. And betrayal was the one thing he never forgave. Hours later, Vincent entered the office. "Boss." "What?" "We found something." He handed Marco security footage. Marco watched silently. His expression changed. Then came disbelief. Then rage. Because the man secretly making phone calls wasn't a servant. It wasn't a guard. It wasn't even one of Marco's soldiers. It was Luca, his younger brother. The boy he had raised after their parents died. The brother he had protected his entire life. Marco stared at the screen. "No." Vincent lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Marco sat down. Not because he wanted to. Because his legs suddenly felt weak. He remembered teaching Luca how to drive. Teaching him how to fight. Saving him countless times. And now, his own brother wanted to destroy him. "Bring him to me." Vincent nodded. But before they could move, an explosion rocked the mansion. Boom. Glass shattered. Screams echoed. Smoke filled the halls. Marco jumped up. "Emily." He ran. Ignoring bullets. Ignoring danger. Ignoring everything. He burst into her room. Empty. His heart stopped. "Emily." No answer. Then he saw blood on the floor. And a single note. Luca's handwriting. Marco's hands shook. He read the message. "If you want them alive, come alone." For the first time in years, the mighty Marco Moretti felt fear. Real fear. Not for himself. For her. Because somewhere out there, Emily and her unborn child had been taken. And the man responsible shared his blood. Luca smiled as Emily slowly woke up. She was tied to a chair. Fear flooded her face. "Where am I?" Luca smiled warmly. Almost kindly. Which somehow made him even scarier. Relax. Emily struggled. Marco will find me. Luca laughed. Exactly. His eyes became dark. And that's why you're here. Emily stared. You hate your brother. Luca's smile disappeared. Hate? He laughed bitterly. You know what it's like growing up in someone else's shadow? His voice rose. Everyone loved Marco. Everyone respected Marco. Everyone followed Marco. He slammed his fist against the table. And I got nothing. Emily whispered. He's your family. Luca sneered. He never treated me like family. He treated me like a child. He controlled everything. His eyes became wild. So now I'll take everything from him. Emily swallowed nervously. You're insane. Luca smiled. No. He leaned closer. I'm finally free. Suddenly, another voice came from the shadows. Actually, you're dead. Everyone turned. Marco stood in the doorway. Alone. Exactly as demanded. Luca laughed. Big brother. Marco's eyes burned with pain. Let her go. Luca smiled. Or what? Marco looked at him. Not with anger. Not with hatred. But with sadness. And somehow that hurt Luca more. I loved you. Those words hit harder than bullets. Luca's smile faltered. You don't get to say that. Marco stepped forward. I raised you. I protected you. I buried our mother alone so you wouldn't have to see her. His voice cracked. I gave you everything. Tears suddenly appeared in Luca's eyes. But pride consumed him. No. He pointed his gun. You gave me scraps. Emily screamed. Marco. But Marco never moved. He looked directly at his brother. If killing me will bring you peace. His voice became soft. Then do it. Luca's hands trembled. Memories flooded his mind. His brother carrying him on his shoulders. His brother teaching him baseball. His brother sitting beside him all night when he had pneumonia. His brother. His family. Tears rolled down Luca's face. I hate you. Marco nodded sadly. I know. Luca's finger tightened. Then suddenly, bang. Everyone froze. Luca stared downward. Blood spread across his chest. Behind him stood Salvatore Romano, holding the gun. Luca collapsed. Shock filled his eyes. You. Salvatore smiled coldly. You outlived your usefulness. Marco's eyes widened. And as Luca fell into his arms, his dying brother whispered words that would change everything. Marco. Blood spilled from his lips. It wasn't Daniel. Marco froze. What? Luca struggled to breathe. The baby. His eyes filled with tears. The baby. Then he whispered one final sentence. And Marco felt his entire world stop. The baby is yours. For a moment, the world itself seemed to stop. Marco stared down at his dying brother. The baby is yours. Those words echoed inside his mind. Over and over. Emily froze in her chair. Salvatore Romano smiled. Oh, this is beautiful. Marco barely heard him. His entire body had gone numb. Luca coughed violently. Blood stained his lips. 8 years ago. He whispered weakly. Marco leaned closer. What are you talking about? Luca struggled to breathe. You remember Miami? Marco's eyes widened. Miami. 8 years earlier. One night. One charity gala. One woman whose face he had never forgotten. They had spent only a few hours together. She had been kind, beautiful, different. But Marco had been married to Isabella. Nothing improper had happened. Or so he had believed. He remembered drinking wine. Remembered feeling strange. And then waking up alone. Ashamed. Confused. He had never understood what had happened. Luca cried. I drugged you. Marco's eyes widened in horror. What? Luca sobbed. I was already jealous. I wanted to hurt you. Emily gasped. Luca looked toward her. You were unconscious too. Tears poured down his face. You both deserved the truth. Emily's mind spun. The charity event. The missing memories. The pregnancy she never understood. The child she had believed belonged to someone she barely knew. Oh God. Luca closed his eyes. I was young, stupid, hateful. Marco's voice trembled. You destroyed our lives. Luca nodded. I know. His breathing weakened. Brother? Marco held him tighter. Don't talk. But Luca smiled sadly. Tell Mom. I tried. And then, he was gone. Marco closed his eyes. Tears finally escaped. Not because Luca had betrayed him, but because despite everything, he still loved him. Salvatore Romano clapped slowly. Touching. Marco stood up, and something changed inside him. The sadness disappeared. What remained was something far more terrifying. Silence. Salvatore frowned. Kill him. Gunfire erupted. But Vincent and Marco's men stormed the building from every side. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Marco never took his eyes off Salvatore. The old mob boss tried to run, but Marco caught him, throwing him against the wall. Salvatore laughed. You've become weak. Marco stared into his eyes. No. His voice was calm. I've become human. Salvatore spat blood. Love makes men weak. Marco shook his head. No. It teaches them what matters. Salvatore reached for a hidden gun. But before he could fire, bang! Vincent lowered his weapon. The threat was over. After 20 years of war, Salvatore Romano was finally gone. And so was the life Marco had known. The following weeks felt unreal. Emily remained quiet. Not because she feared Marco, but because she didn't know what to say. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them had known the truth. One evening she stood on the balcony. Marco joined her. Neither spoke for a while. Finally Emily whispered, Are you angry? Marco looked surprised. At you? She nodded. He shook his head. No. Tears filled her eyes. I should have remembered. How? You were drugged. So were you. Emily looked down. I'm scared. Marco smiled softly. So am I. She laughed through tears. The mighty Marco Moretti is afraid? He smiled. Terrified. She wiped her eyes. What if we're terrible at this? Marco looked toward the stars. Then we'll learn. Silence settled between them. Then Emily whispered, You really mean that? Marco nodded. I lost the woman I loved once. His voice became softer. I'm not losing another family. Emily's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Not protected by money. Not protected by walls. Protected by love. Months later the entire mansion became chaos. Vincent nearly fainted when Marco burst into his office. It's happening. Vincent blinked. What? The baby? Vincent jumped. Already? Marco looked like a man about to face execution. Do something. Vincent laughed. I don't deliver babies. 3 hours later, Marco Moretti, feared by thousands, nearly passed out in the delivery room. Emily burst into laughter. Marco. I'm trying. No, you're not. I've been shot 3 times and this is worse. The nurses laughed. Vincent laughed. Even the doctor laughed. A tiny cry filled the room. Everything stopped. Marco stared. His eyes widened. And tears rolled freely down his face. A little boy. Perfect. Healthy. Beautiful. The nurse smiled. Congratulations, Dad. Marco gently held him. And the feared king of Chicago cried like a child. He has your eyes, Emily whispered. Marco smiled. No. He has yours. The baby wrapped his tiny fingers around Marco's hand. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not power. Not money. Not fear. Only this. Only them. But peace did not come easily. Many men inside the organization viewed Marco differently now. They whispered. They doubted him. One of his captains finally spoke. You've changed. Marco nodded. I have. The man sneered. You've become soft. Marco smiled. Maybe. But tell me something. The room fell silent. When was the last time any of you slept peacefully? Nobody answered. When was the last time you hugged your children? Silence. When was the last time you felt happiness? Several men lowered their eyes. Marco continued. We spent years building an empire. But we forgot why. His voice became emotional. We forgot family. We forgot love. We forgot ourselves. One by one the men listened. Not to a king. Not to a monster. But to a man. And something extraordinary happened. Marco Moretti began dismantling his empire. Slowly. Carefully. Legally. Business by business. Deal by deal. People laughed. People doubted him. But he no longer cared. Because every night, he came home. And that was enough. 5 years later. Sunlight filled the backyard. A little boy chased butterflies across the grass. Papa. Marco laughed. I'm coming. Little Anthony jumped into his arms. Daddy, look. Marco smiled. I see. Nearby, Emily sat smiling. And beside her, a baby girl slept peacefully. Marco walked over. His son held one hand. His daughter rested in the other. Emily looked at him. You know. What? If someone had told me years ago that I'd marry the most feared man in Chicago. Marco laughed. You would have run. She smiled. Probably. They both laughed. Then Anthony asked, Daddy? Yes. Were you always old? Emily burst into laughter. Marco stared at his son. Excuse me? Anthony giggled. Were dinosaurs your friends? Marco gasped dramatically. Betrayal. Emily laughed so hard tears formed in her eyes. And Marco simply stared at them. His family. His miracle. His second chance. Later that evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Marco stood alone in the garden. He looked toward the stars. And smiled. I hope you're proud, Isabella. A soft wind passed through the trees. And somehow, he felt peace. Not because life had been perfect. Not because pain had disappeared. But because he had finally learned something. The greatest power in the world wasn't fear. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't violence. It was love. Because one rainy night, a feared Mafia boss stopped his car for a pregnant stranger. And in saving her, he unknowingly saved himself. And changed his future forever. The end.